Today we're going to take a look at the quadratic formula, which is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a, where your discriminant is whatever's on the inside of that square root. So it's b squared minus 4ac. We're going to talk about the discriminant on the back of these notes. So first, let's take a look at your quadratic formula and how to solve quadratic equations using the formula. You need to get everything into standard form first. So if we remember, standard form is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So our first example in standard form, it is going to be x squared plus 3x plus 14 equaling 0. Your a is a 1 because it's in front of the x squared, b is a 3, and c is 14. Now we're going to go ahead and plug those values into our quadratic formula. So we have x equals negative b, so it's a negative 3, plus or minus our square root of b squared, so 3 squared, minus 4 times a, which is a 1, times c, which is 14. That's going to be all over 2a, which is 2 times 1. Once we have all of those values plugged in, now we're going to go ahead and start simplifying. So we have x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root. 3 squared is 9 minus 4 times 1 times 14 should be minus 56 all over 2. Go ahead and combine that 9 minus 56. So we have x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of negative 47 all over 2. Now, from what we previously talked about, when we have a negative inside that square root, we've got to think of that as the square root of negative 1, which is I. 47 cannot be simplified any further, so we're going to have x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 47. I comes to the outside all over 2. Since it can't be simplified any further, that is your answer. For number 2, we need to get that into standard form. When possible, try to make sure that your a term is positive. It'll just help your calculations later on. So let's go ahead and subtract that 16x. So we have 2x squared minus 16x plus 50 equals 0. It does help to make sure that we have it in standard form because we need to be able to identify our a, b, and c. So our a is 2, our b is negative 16, our c is 50. From there, plug our values into our quadratic formula. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root. Oh, and I accidentally did a, so let me go back. So negative b is a negative 16, so that'll be a positive 16. Plus or minus our square root of negative 16 squared minus 4 times a times c. All over 2a. Now simplify. So x equals 16 plus or minus the square root, a negative 16 squared. If you're using your calculator, make sure you're putting parentheses around that negative 16 because we're going to have a positive 256 minus 400 all over 4. So x equals 16 plus or minus the square root of negative 144 all over 4. Again, we have a negative inside our square root, so that means we're going to have an I. And the square root of 144, it is a perfect square, so that'll be a 12. So we'll have x equals 16 plus or minus 12i all over 4. Take a look at the numbers that we have. A 16, a 12, and a 4. What can go into all of those numbers? 2 does go into all of them. However, a 4 also goes into all of them. So let's reduce everything by 4. So our final answer is going to be a 4 plus or minus 3i. We want to make sure that we're reducing everything completely. Let's take a look at example number 3. It's already in standard form, and we're going to think of that f of x as a 0. So we want to know when f of x or y equals 0, what is our x values? Go ahead and identify your a, b, and c. A is 4, b is 4, c is 1. Now we're going to go ahead and plug it into our quadratic formula. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. Simplify. X equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root. 4 squared is 16 minus 4 times 4 times 1 is 16 all over 8. Continue to simplify. We get x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 0 all over 8. Well, what does the square root of 0 equal? It's just 0. So that ultimately just goes away. And if that goes away, so does that plus or minus. So we are just left with x equals negative 4 over 8, which is the same thing as negative 1 over 2. So our solution is negative 1/2. And if you have time, you may want to plug this into your calculator and take a look at the graph. What you'll notice with that graph is that, let me move this over a little bit, is when you plug it in, it's going to cross at negative half and it's going to open up, and that's actually where your vertex is going to be. So we do have two solutions, it just happens to be the same solution. Example number 4. We have to get this in standard form first. So let's go ahead and subtract our 6x and add our 4. So we'll have x squared minus 6x plus 4 equaling 0. Identify your a, your b, and your c. A equals 1, b equals negative 6, c equals 4. Let's go ahead and plug that into your quadratic formula. So we have x equals negative b. So negative 6 becomes a positive 6 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. Simplify. 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 minus 16 all over 2. Continue to simplify. We have x equals 6 plus or minus the square root of 20 over 2. Now 20, that can be simplified, the square root of 20. So let's take a look. 20, break that down. What goes into 20? 5 and 4, 2 and 10. Let's go with 2 and 10. Break 10 down. We get 2 and 5. Remember, we're taking the square root, so they're coming out in groups of 2. We have a pair there, so a 2 jumps out. Our 5 stays in. So we're going to have x equals 6 plus or minus 2 square root of 5 over 2. And to simplify, you want to take a look at your 6, your 2, and your 2. Ignore your 5. We cannot simplify that any further. So whatever is inside that square root has to stay. But your numbers outside, if we can, we want to reduce. 6, 2, and 2, a 2 can go into everything. So when we reduce that, we should get 3 plus or minus a 1, but we don't need to write it, square root of 5. So we've got 3 plus or minus square root of 5 for our final answer. Take a look at example number 5. What are the solutions to our equation 2x squared plus 4x equaling 7? We have a multiple choice. So we're going to go ahead and get this into standard form. So subtract your 7. So 2x squared plus 4x minus 7 equals 0. Identify your A, your B, and your C. We have 2, 4, negative 7. Let's plug it in. So you've got x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all over 2a. And now simplify. X equals negative 4 plus or minus 4 squared is 16. If you notice, you have two negatives here, so that's going to become a positive. So 4 times 2 times 7 will give us 56 all over 4. Continuing to simplify, we have x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 72 all over 4. 72, if you notice, can be simplified. So we have to determine what it can be simplified to. So 72 can break down 36 times 2. 36 is 6 and 6. You can continue to break your 6's down further, but that's a pair. So that's going to be 6 root 2. So we have x equals negative 4 plus or minus 6 square root of 2 all over 4. Now, that choice is not there. So what do we have to do? Hopefully you're noticing that we can reduce. The negative 4, the 6, and the 4 all have a common factor of 2. So we can take out a 2. So our reduced answer will be x equals negative 2 plus or minus 3 square root of 2 all over 2. That choice is D. Let's turn the page and look at the discriminant. Now, the discriminant, that is just what's underneath your square root in your quadratic formula. B squared minus 4ac. Depending on what type of number comes out of b squared minus 4ac will tell you what kind of solutions you're going to have. So taking a look, if b squared minus 4ac is greater than 0, so if it's positive, you're going to have two real solutions. If b squared minus 4ac is equal to 0, so if you end up with 0 equals 0, you're going to have one solution. And then if b squared minus 4ac is less than 0, so if it's a negative number, you're going to have two imaginary solutions. Because remember that b squared minus 4ac is underneath that square root. So if you have a negative in there, of course you're going to have an I. So that's where you're getting your imaginary solutions from. So for these, to figure out your discriminant, you are just identifying your a, b, and c and calculating b squared minus 4ac. So taking a look at number 1, it's already in standard form. So now identify your a, your b, and your c. So a is 1, b is 4, c is a negative 2. We're going to do b squared minus 4ac. So you're going to have 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 2. 16, again, you have a negative and a negative, so that'll become a positive. 4 times 2 times 1 is 8. So 16 plus 8 is 24. How does 24 compare to 0? It is bigger. So if we look up, when it is bigger, it's positive. You have two real solutions. So for this, we have two real solutions. So for number 2, it's already in standard form. Identify your A, B, and C. Plug it into your b squared minus 4ac. So negative 5 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 2. 25, we have two negatives, so that become a plus 16. So we get 41. How does 41 compare to 0? It's bigger. So again, we have two real solutions. Let's take a look at number 3. Is this in standard form? So we need to get it into standard form. So I'm going to go ahead and add 5x squared. So we have 4x squared plus 1 equals 4x. Subtract 4x. Remember, we want it in standard form. So make sure we're writing that minus 4x in between our 4x squared and 1. So 4x squared minus 4x plus 1 equals 0. From there, identify our A, our B, and our C. A is 4, B is negative 4, C is 1. And then plug it into our discriminant, b squared minus 4ac. So we have negative 4 squared minus 4 times 4 times 1. Well, negative 4 squared is a positive 16. Negative 4 times a positive 4, minus 16. Well, 16 minus 16 is 0. So how does that compare to 0? It's equal. So that means we have one real solution. And you can always plug our equation into y equals and take a look at the graph and see how many solutions there are. All right, taking a look at number 4. We have decimals, but we can still figure out our discriminant. So let's go ahead and get that in standard form. So we've got 2.5x squared minus 2.8x minus 0.4. Our A is 2.5, our B is negative 2.8, and this C is negative 0.4. Plugging that in to our B squared, so negative 2.8 squared minus 4 times A times C. You can go ahead and use your calculator to figure out your discriminant. Just make sure when you're squaring your negative 2.8, you put parentheses around negative 2.8. So 7.84 plus this should give you a 4. The reason it is a plus is, again, because you have two negatives. When we add those together, you're going to get 11.84, which again is bigger than 0. So we have two real solutions. The last two, 5 and 6, are just taking a look at graphs and determining what type of solutions they have. So let's go ahead and take a look at those. So when you take a look at graph number 5, what type of solutions do you think you're going to have? Hopefully you said 2 imaginary. Because it does not cross the x-axis. And we need to make a note here that imaginary solutions do come in pairs because you have that plus minus. So for example, you could have something like 5i. Well, if this is your positive 5i, your other solution will be a minus 5i. Another example could be something like 2 plus the square root of 3i. Well, if that's the case, if this is your first one, your second one's going to be 2 minus the square root of 3i. So the only thing that's changing between the two is you have one with a plus, one with a minus. One's positive, one's negative. For example number 6, we have 1 real solution. Taking a look at that, our solution is 3.